This time on Fixity Fix, we're installing an accurate and reliable battery meter in our camper. Fixity Fix! This particular camper is a New Camp 320 CS, but the process is similar for just about all campers out there. In our case, the camper house battery happens to be an SOK 206 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. However, this type of power meter would work with any type of battery, whether it's flooded lead acid, AGM, or lithium iron phosphate. We could put the meter anywhere that we could fish a wire to in the camper. Several potential spots. We ended up choosing the spot here right above the television set just because there were already a lot of wires coming in and we could get at the route a little bit more easily and see this from areas in the camper where we spend our time. And without further ado, let's get around to showing you how we installed it. The first step is to get that TV removed, which is pretty obvious how to do. It's 9 of these square head screws holding in the TV arm and this bezel. When those come out, it affords access to wiring and creating a hole behind this wall. We make no guarantees this is going to work for you. We're trying it out for us. Make sure that you check out all specifications and consult with a licensed RV repair person if you attempt to do something like this yourself. We'll be mounting the gauge on the center right here below the AC and Aldi controls. That's going to be a 54.5 millimeter hole saw, which I'll have to get and do this part later, but we'll get everything wired ahead of time. This is going to require fishing a wire from the new hole all the way down into beneath the bench here. We're going to drill a hole into the floor through to the outside, run the wire through it, through a grommet, and then of course we'll caulk it to keep critters out. After I finish dropping stuff, these flexible fiberglass fish tapes come in very handy. I'll leave a link in the description.
If you click on it and purchase something, Fixity Fix does get a little bit of money. Doesn't cost you more, but it's a way to support our channel.
Thanks for supporting the channel. I'm going to put a tip on here that we can connect the wire to and pull the wire through when the time comes. This is part of why safety goggles are always important. If this thing whips up and catches you in the face, that's trouble. Now, when I do drill a hole, I'm going to have to reach back here and hold these wires or tape the wires behind it out of the way. And once we get the wire through the floor, we'll be able to pull it all the way up to where we need it. We have remodeled a lot of the electrical system in our house and several of our cars with this kit. And now it's working in the camper. So we're about to drill a hole in the bottom of the camper. I have a 1/2-inch bit loaded in here. I have plenty of room in front of the wheel well here for a hole. All the power is off in the camper, and I'm going to drill here. That obviously went all the way through. I measured to my knuckle here and know that the propane line is to my wrist, so I had to be very careful to avoid drilling through the propane line, even though the propane is off. We wouldn't want to discover that the hard way. So I've mounted the shunt here on this crossbar, this aluminum crossbar, next to the fuse panel that I put in. The trick to making these things work is they connect the big lugs here in series from the negative battery post to the shunt, and then from the shunt to power. So we're going to splice into this wire right here and go from shunt to battery and then shunt to negative power going into the cabin and anything that's using power. The trick to making it work properly, you can see that I have a Victron charger set up here. I'm going to have to move this wire over to the power side because anything going into or out of the battery needs to go through this shunt in order to get measured. This SOK 206 amp hour battery uses 1/2 inch battery terminals. So this needs to be removed. This battery is completely discharged, by the way. I did that so I can get a true reading once I charge with the shunt connected. So we need to move this charger terminal off of here and move it back to the power side of the shunt. What was I saying about the battery being completely discharged?
I was gonna say, was that a shock?
It was. Got a little bit of juice in it, I guess.
This battery just doesn't want to die.
No. Actually, with that being the case, I'm going to do the rest of this with the battery negative terminal off completely. So negative terminal is off completely. Cover the positive terminal here with an insulator just so I don't drop a tool across and arc the thing. We need this guy to go onto this power lug. We might have to change the connector. These terminal bolts look pretty thick. So this is the wire, the negative wire that feeds negative from the battery to the fuse panel. And I'm just going to cut it so that I can go from shunt to fuse panel to cabin, and then from battery negative to shunt. So battery minus and power minus. And we're also going to add this connector from the Victron charger and tender to the power side, which means I have to cut off the factory connector because it's not quite a large enough gauge. I'll strip both of these wires. These are both 10 gauge. These are each going to warrant their own connector because they're 10 gauge wires. I have 10 gauge connectors. You want to make a nice strong connection here. When crimping, it might seem a little counterintuitive, but you get a better crimp if you have the open part or the cut part of the wire terminal you're crimping on against the solid part of the crimper and the part that sticks in on the intact side. Let me show you a close-up of what I mean by crimping properly. I've taken off the heat shrink insulation on this connector. You can see there's a slit on this side right here where my thumb is pointing, and it's solid on the other side. Your crimpers are going to have a pointed interface and a smooth interface. And so a lot of people crimp with the slit toward the pointy interface, and that's actually wrong. You want the slit to be facing the smooth side so that when you crimp, if there's a wire in there, it looks like this. That ends up giving you a pressure point on the side of the connector with a lot of integrity for holding the wire in. That sounds good. We'll crimp this one. Also a 10 to 12 gauge terminal. I use heat shrink connectors whenever I can just to keep everything watertight and strong. same deal here. Strip this to 10 gauge. 10 gauge heat shrink connector. This is controversial. Different people do it different ways, but I use crimp connectors on anything mobile because solder connectors on something like a wire that moves around in an engine compartment or a compartment like this, solder gets brittle over time. You end up with bad joints or bad connections after a few years. Crimp connectors are more reliable. Not as pretty. These go on to here, onto this bolt here on the power side. Just going to stack these. Finger tight at first, and then it's a 17 millimeter bolt on this particular shunt. I think I'll drop the washers into the compartment again, Sarah.
No, you will not.
I get all excited as the project gets to the power on point. Start to get the dropsies.
Good job.
Thanks. I'll probably knock them into there at some point. Notice I'm putting the flat side of the terminals up against the shunt itself rather than like this, just because you get a better connection when it's flat to flat. Don't make me go get my tap and die out. I will. I could have possibly fouled that. Alright, the trick I just did there, a lot of times when you have a bolt that won't thread, if you start it by going backwards until you feel it click, then you can thread it in. And if that doesn't work, then it's time to get your tap and die set out. See if we can make it work with the... Yep.
Nice.
It's more of a feeling it click than a hearing it click, by the way. Right now that we have the negative side connected, we just need to run one wire from somewhere on the positive battery terminal to this pickup side, B+, B+. It's in little green connector here, and it's just a voltage sensing wire, so it can be a small wire that will connect somewhere on the battery terminal here. Positive battery terminal coming off. I'm just going to connect a wire into this positive circuit here. So here I've added an additional 18 gauge wire to the positive terminal stack. That wire is simply going to pin into this B+ connector here, the green one on top. Lastly, we stack these connectors onto this battery post. Put our insulator over the positive side. Then we connect our long jumper wire to the gauge post. And run this wire wherever inside you want to mount your gauge. We're going to test it out outside before we mount the gauge inside. Alright, and we can see that the gauge has come alive. And now we're going to charge the battery with our Victron charger. And when I connect it, it's going to start testing the battery and then charge. And we should see things start to happen here. Alright, we can see that it's putting 20 amps into the battery. You can see that it's going through a testing phase right now. That test light is blinking. It's too bright to see that out here right now. And so it's pushing current into the battery, you can see. It tells you how much current, and this current is going to increase as this battery charger decides how much this battery needs. This is only a 15 amp charger, so it's going to need to charge for a couple of days to get up to the full capacity of this battery. So we're going to leave it alone for a couple of days. During that time, we'll mount this in the cabin. The instructions call for a 54.5 millimeter hole, and the closest I have to that is a 2 1/4 out of this Milwaukee hole saw hole dozer kit. This is an awesome hole saw kit. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in one. So the 2 1/4 bit, we're going to cut a hole right here. So now that we have our hole, we just feed the data wire into it. Then this retaining clip goes on the back. I'm just tightening this retaining clip wing nut with my finger behind this panel. You can see your fish tape, fish rod here, the green piece coming up that's going down through this wall. And then here is the interface for a wire for pulling it. So we put this through like this. I'm going to try pulling it through on the meatier part of the wire rather than the connector part, and see if I can get it through there without drama. There she is. A little trick my uncle taught me before putting things like this together behind a wall is to just loop them around each other so they can't be pulled apart on the weak parts. That is connected. And now we just have to fish this wire, this end, down through the hole we made. I'm going to try to do it without having to detach this connector. If I can't get it through there, then it'll have to be detached, and that's okay. The trick with this, getting it through the minimum size hole possible, is to minimize the profile of this largest piece here. So I'm going to tape it on parallel to the fish tape rod. See if I can get away with this. Don't want to have to rebuild this wire connector. I don't want to have to cut the wire or drill a bigger hole. This is the hole we drilled beforehand. Try to keep it as straight as we can. Let's go check outside and see what's going on out there. The problem with being a YouTuber is your helper is holding the camera instead of outside grabbing the other end when you're fishing something through a hole.
Sorry.
Sarah. The other problem with YouTube is your neighbor always gets out the leaf blower when you're trying to make content. Ta-da!
All right.
I'm simply going to zip tie this along this propane line, run it through this rubber gland here, and it's important when you're penetrating steel or metal to run a wire through a rubber gland like this and just follow it up and then bring it into the battery container. So this is the wire coming from inside. We fished it down through the wall, down through the floor, and then along the propane hose. I'll zip tie it securely, but now all we have to do is connect this end to the shunt after we kill a mosquito. until it snaps in. And that is everything connected. Let's go inside and see if the gauge works. And there she is. So we've got 100% charge. You can also watch percentages just by pressing the percent button. So the battery's at what I'm calling 100% charge, which will get us through many nights of camping.
Yay!
For the holes you cut to run the wire through, make sure you caulk them up real good. A couple of hindsight observations. I used a 2 1/4 inch bit, and that worked okay. A 2 1/8 inch bit, if I had had one, might have been a little better, but this did fine. This light is pulsing right now because I'm charging the battery after we did a few days of camping. It's bringing in 10 amps of charge with our 15 amp Victron charger. The plus means the battery's getting the charge, and it's also pulsing. The light will pulse when you're getting a charge. The light will stay bright if you're using power. That's a point of some controversy on various forums and on Amazon reviews for this particular meter. There's nothing in the instructions about how to turn off the light. The light is bright. If you're running the fan or the fridge at night, this thing will light up the whole cabin, and that just wasn't acceptable. All you have to do is simultaneously hold both arrow buttons at the same time for about 3 seconds. Bye light, and now the light will stay off. To bring the light back on, it's just the same thing again. Hello, light. Our preference is light off. You can see right now the battery has 202.9 amp hours in it. Right now it's using just a little bit of amperage to run the lights in the camper, and you can see that flowing here on the meter. You can set to percent, so the battery is at 100%. You can see it's running at 13.67 volts, and then back to amperage. As always, thank you for watching Fixity Fix, right, Sarah?
That's right. We appreciate you all.
And what happens if people find this kind of content useful?
Well, hopefully it improves their lives, and they'll give us a like on the video and subscribe.
There you go. Subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends, and if you don't like it, hit that thumbs down. How many times?
Twice.
That's right, to really stick it to us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Fixity Fix.
Caulk it.
Caulk it real good.